doesn't matter what comes up. It doesn't matter. This is not about stopping thinking. This is not about stopping anything. This is not about changing anything. This is about simply noticing the awareness that is aware of all of that. In the ordinary course of events, that's not the case, right? In the ordinary course of events, you're being Bob, and Bob is having thoughts, right? In this case, you're aware of there being a Bob who's having the thoughts. So now there's attention on something that there hasn't been attention on, which is the heart of the matter, which is the whole point, to discover the truth of yourself as that, because without that, which doesn't change, which never came and never goes, right? That's stable. Without that, all the other things that are changing wouldn't have a stage to play on. So that's the root. That's the essence. That's the reality from which that's the screen the movie's playing on. That's the reality that is your existence, is the actual you, and which doesn't change, and the other things are coming and going all the time. Right? So see if when you meditate that you can be aware of being aware, and then let go. Let everything play the way it plays. There's no need to try and control anything. It will. The nature of the way things go when the awareness is known of itself is everything that's going begins to orbit around that instead of just come and go and be disorganized and crazy and whatnot. It's just by your establishing the reality of yourself as the center of it all, as the awareness in which it is occurring, right? Because prior to that, you're ignorant of that awareness. You're ignoring that awareness, and you're being the habitual Bob. You're being the character that you were conditioned to be, and that one's meditating. So you're being what's in the awareness instead of the awareness. So that's the shift that you have to make. Gabish?
Are you more of an observer?
Well, if you say you're an observer, then you could say, well, it's still a character. It's still an entity. It's still an observer, right? So, but the awareness is just aware. It's not observing per se. Its nature is to be aware, and when it is being aware, what appears in that awareness. It doesn't require observation per se. You know what I mean? You can't do anything about it. Right now, you can't stop. When you look over here, you can't not see me. So it's not, you don't have to turn on your observer. You see what I mean? So the aware is aware of what appears before it naturally, and therefore there's no reason to add anything to that, but rather simply to experience that, and then to get that that's you.
You've used the metaphor before of the movie screen.
Mm-hmm.
You're the screen,
Mm-hmm.
and play is going on your screen. Is there another metaphor that maybe I could get better than that?
Well, another way of talking about it that's a little more refined is to say that there's the screen and there's what's playing on the screen, right? And then there's the projector that projects the light onto the screen, which produces the image, right? And all of it is one thing happening. All of it is one. These are just metaphors, to kind of give you a sense of what this is about. But then having gotten the sense of what it's about, and I've been trying to harp on this recently, don't get stuck with the finger. Don't get stuck with the metaphor, with the screen, the light, or the images on the screen. Rather, allow yourselves to recognize what they are pointing at, what they're talking about, and then let that go and see if you can recognize that what they're pointing at is actually the awareness itself. Right? And what happens in the awareness and the awareness are the same thing. All there is, one thing to get to, is all there is awareness. All there is awareness. That's what non-duality means. There isn't anything but awareness, right? And that's why in the book that I've started to write recently, the title is probably going to be Being God. So I might as well start with, really being provocative and say being God, right? Because if all there is awareness and you're that awareness and there's nothing but awareness, well, that must mean you are the DOG, right? Or the GOD. What I say? I said dog. Well, dogs are gods too. So, and then, one of the things that I've heard in the past from one of my teachers describing God in kind of the way things occur or the way things move is he said God is generate, right? G for generate, O for organize, and D for destroy. So that kind of covers the whole thing. You have to get clear that who you thought you were was a thought. That who you thought you were, when you experience awareness, that everything that you previously considered to be real flips, and it's no longer that's no longer the case. Everything actually appears to be the opposite of what you thought it was. So you thought you were aware, and then when you see the truth of it, it flips, and there's an awareness of you, an awareness of you, the thinker, awareness of you, the body, right? And so everything flips, and awareness then becomes the truth, and everything else becomes an appearance within the truth. And this is one of the things that's confounding about the whole teaching process. We say you're not your body, right? Right? Well, how can we say you're not your body and say awareness is everything? You got to catch these things, right? Well, we can say you're not your body because at that point we're just trying to get you to start to undo what you believed was true, right? But then the next step is to then say, well, actually you are your body. Everything is you, but only if the you that we're talking about is awareness itself, right? Awareness is everything. It's like Rupert says. First, it's useful to see the difference between the screen and what appears on the screen. Like the screen is awareness, right? And what appears on the screen, right, is everything that's happening, right? But then the next step is to move beyond that understanding to a more refined understanding in which the awareness and what's the screen and what's on the screen are the same thing. Are the same thing. If you look at when you talk about a movie screen and what's being projected on the screen, that's one way of talking about it. But if you look at an LCD screen, like on a modern flat screen TV, right, there's nothing being projected on that screen, is there? The screen and what's on the screen is the same thing, right? The what do they call those pieces of bits of color? Pixels. The pixels just keep rearranging and changing colors. Isn't that what's happening, right? So that's a better way of understanding it in a more refined sense, that awareness and what's in awareness is the same thing. And so the pixels in the screen in an LCD TV are one thing that's just moving around and permeating, right? And so that is a more refined understanding of awareness, that what you look at that appears to be out there, there's an out there and there's an in here. In reality, there is no out there and in here. All there is awareness, and this is all, the whole thing is just permeating, right? dancing, right? The dance of consciousness, they call it. Lila, the dance of consciousness, right? And we in our own ignorance, which we consider to be intelligence, we look at that and we play God about it and say that we know what's going on and we understand what's happening, when in reality that's not the case. And so because of that, because we identify with this pea-shooter brain and this limited personality, and we understand everything in terms of the more information we get, the more we know, which isn't true, right? That or the more power we get, or the greater position we have in the world, the more we know. Obviously, that's not true if you look around, right? And then from there, we begin to talk about things as if we know what we're talking about, right? And we say, well, this is right and this is wrong and this should be so and this shouldn't be so and this person's good and this person's bad and that's right and that's wrong, right? But you see, that's all looking at it from a very relative, limited, ignorant perspective. Because in reality, we don't see the truth. The truth of it is that everything that is occurring fits perfectly into the reality that exists. So without, for example, without what's going on right now, whether we talk about it politically or in terms of COVID, right? Without what's going on right now, how could the possibility of recognizing what that stimulates become available? You see, how could this play of consciousness continue to evolve the way it's evolving without there being circumstances that will shed light on ignorance, you see? That will give people the opportunity to maybe increase their suffering because the suffering that's occurred so far hasn't gotten the job done yet. Do you understand? So from a larger perspective, that's all workable. It's all workable. And from the largest perspective, there's nothing at stake. See, that's the beauty, that if you want to talk about it in terms of maybe Christian terminology or whatever, God loves you so much that God will create things to happen in your world, right? To get you to recognize that you are and Him are one, right? And in the creation of those things that are happening in the world, none of it's real. So God really loves us, and God is not going to hurt us. All God is doing is creating a dream, and maybe a worse dream, right, to get us to wake up and see the truth that we and God are one. But the situation that's going on, right, is getting its job done. We don't see that. It's getting its job done. It's pulling all the states of mind into position, isn't it? And having them, go through suffering, more suffering, right? But the purpose of suffering is to wake up, right? So if you were orchestrating the world and you were orchestrating humanity's experience and your goal was to have humanity wake up and recognize the truth so humanity could be free, right? You'd probably be doing the same stuff. You'd probably...
God creates evil?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Without evil, there would be no reference point for good.
But if God creates evil, then God is dualistic, good and evil.
Good and evil are the same thing. If non-duality is true, good and evil are the same thing, because there are not two. So you have to, one of the things that I've been saying here that I will continue to say, is that you have to, if you keep listening to what I'm saying with your mind will start to get into trouble with it, right? It won't make sense. It'll be in conflict with what you thought was true. It'll be in conflict with what you think should be true, so forth and so on, right? But what you have to do is you have to be willing to take your place and understand that it's not our business. It's not our business when we're in the world as a body, as a personality. It's not our business to try and understand and figure out and decide what we think is right and wrong about what God's doing here. Do you understand? Well, there's good and evil are the same in the sense that they are two different ways that something appears. Remember what I said earlier, that none of it's real? If you go to the movies and there's no good and evil in the movie, you'll probably be bored, right? So good, and yet it's an appearance on the screen. You're not really involved with it. You understand? So they're appearances. They're not realities. They're being used to create conflict. They're being used. It's just like Jesus said in the Bible. I'm paraphrasing it, but he said, I didn't come here to create peace and love between people. I came here to create conflict between mother and son and father and daughter. That's a very confusing thing to read in the King James Version of the Bible, right? But what it really means is I have to set up a situation in which it appears that all these things are happening, right? To shake you up and get you to let go of your attachment to what you think is real that's not real. And so good and evil are useful in that regard. But in reality, they're just an appearance. Nobody actually is dying. Nobody actually is suffering. This is an appearance. And when you wake up and you see things for what they are and you experience a non-dual seeing of things, then that's where the peace is. That's where you can relax because you understand, this is an appearance, that's all. No, nobody's really getting hurt. It's just part of what God set up by separating God from him or herself to manifest in these individual bodies, right? And then create what would need to be there in order for this process of evolution to occur. In order to wake up, you have to go to sleep. In order to seek relief, you have to suffer. You know, that's just the game. That's just the setup that's going on here. And that's why, I was listening to one of my teachers the other day, and she was talking to her students, and they asked similar kinds of questions, well, what about this, or what about that, right? And she said, look, let me just put it as simple as possible. Either really let go and let yourself get the truth, and if you do, you will experience peace, right? Or keep practicing relaxing and being peaceful. Keep practicing relaxing. Because if there's nothing really going on, right? If the truth is there's nothing really going on, and the truth is that you're not going to die, right? And the truth is that everything is perfect and everything is workable, right? Whether you, as the identity that you consider yourself to be, see that and get that is one thing. But if in fact, in an absolute sense, that's the truth, then you can really feel safe and secure in simply relaxing. Just relax and let what's happening, and stop thinking, stop allowing yourself to involve yourself with it as if you know what's going on, or as if you could know what's going on with a pea shooter mind, with this limited identity and this limited brain. But in your case, the one thing that I would keep saying to you is that if you stop relating to thoughts and having the thoughts be real and believing the thoughts, which keeps leaving you in confusion, which keeps leaving you in conflict, but rather recognize that thoughts are insubstantial. They're always changing. right? They're not real, you can't show me a thought, right? So that you start to look, this is what I was talking about in the other class about transparency. So that you start to see through the thought. So the interpretation the thought's giving you is not where you stop and consider that to be reality. But you see through the thought, which is insubstantial, to beyond the thought. And when you see beyond the thought, you can see things as they are, not the interpretation of things. So you've got to start to learn to look beyond the thought. If you're in a situation with this guy here, right, and I'm assuming that you two are like most other people, the conflict happens, right? And when that happens, then and something triggers you, either one of you, and when that happens, the mind starts bringing up fight, flight, or those thoughts, right? You start to go into a defensive aggressive modality, and then it brings up the energy of anger in the system, right? At that time, the person who you before that knew loved you and you were getting along fine, before your very eyes, it starts to be perceived as the enemy. Because why? Because now you're relating to the thoughts, and you're not able to see through the thoughts at the actual person who is the one who you trust and you love. That gets lost because now you're paying attention to what got stimulated, and you're stopping with the thoughts instead of realizing their transparency and seeing through them so that you could recognize what's actually going on. And if you can do that, right, then even when those things come up, you don't buy it. You don't believe it. You stay related to the truth that this is a person who loves me. And what they're saying and doing right now is being interpreted in a way by my mind and my brain that's causing certain thoughts. But those thoughts are not true. Those are reactions. So you see what I mean by looking through the thoughts to see what's actually happening? And the proof of what I'm saying is that after things calm down and after the fight's over or whatever happens, right, and things calm down, right, and the system starts to calm down because it's no longer in threat mode, right, then you're back and you see again who the person really was, right? And then you feel remorse. It's like, oh, what did I do? What did I say? You see what I'm saying? Because now you came back to a more realistic state of mind. So what this is about is instead of having to go through all that, right? Be able to be there and be aware of the truth of yourself in the moment as it's occurring, so that you can not be stopped in believing the interpretations that are arising and the emotions that are arising, and you can stay tuned in to what's actually happening and respond to that, what's actually happening. This is what it's all about. Otherwise, this would just be some stuff. I mean, what would be the point of all this unless you wanted to go to parties and say, I'm really spiritual? The point of all this is to be able, in a practical, everyday life, right, to be able to be peaceful, to be loving, to be kind, to stay connected to the people that you love and not have to suffer through all these, disturbances and breakups. That's the bottom line. That's why, as a psychologist, I see the value of having the idea of dealing with the way you are in terms of your behavior and the emotional states you're in and the mental states you're in, to see all that as being very much connected to these wisdom teachings and practices, right? Because through the wisdom teachings and practices, the psychology that you are matures. It matures. It becomes more realistic. It becomes more related to reality. Things become easier. You become happier. You become more skillful. You're not tricked anymore. You're not fooled into believing the lies anymore. So you don't run with the herd anymore. You see things clearly. It's very practical. But, as I have been saying here, it's also the process of coming out of your misery, the process of taking responsibility for your own liberation is one in which there's inevitably going to be challenges. There are times when you will be confused. There are times when you experience resistance. There are times when you will feel, that this isn't for you, or that, this is unrealistic, or it's bullshit, or whatever the case may be. That's an inevitable part of the process. But I promise you, and you don't have to take my word for it, that if any of that comes up and you buy into that, and because you buy into that, you just walk away and you go back into doing the other things in life that you thought would get you what you want, you'll be back. You'll be back. You know why? There's nowhere else to go. There's nothing else. The truth is all there is, and it's just a matter of, it's a required process to learn about the truth and to recognize you are the truth. And however long that takes you depends on, how many times you want to step away from it and be right. How many times you want to step away from it and, do what the good ideas you think will work. But if you look around in the world and you get some time under your belt, it's not hard to realize what the right choice is.